welcome to the Adobe House stage, publisher and co-president of Variety, Dea Lawrence.
Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to be back. We were here last year. How many of you were here last year? Oh, a returning crowd. We're so excited to be partnering once again with Adobe to present a series of conversations celebrating innovation and creativity in filmmaking. Together, Variety and Adobe reaffirm their commitment to champion the voices that drive cinema forward. We're proud to offer a platform that spotlights the resilience and the ingenuity of creators who are shaping the future of storytelling. So now I have some exciting news from Adobe that is worth an applause. So listen to this. Adobe has recently announced its backing of a $10 million film and TV fund for unrepresented creators, where the company will offer grants, career development, fellowships, and access to its technology. Now that is remarkable. Plus, Adobe is a big contributor to this year's Sundance lineup. 85% of the films playing at Sundance used Adobe Creative Cloud. Okay, so we are excited to present our first session, Anatomy of a Documentary, the AI doc, or How I Became an Apocaloptimist. Say that 10 times fast. Where we will step inside the evolving process of nonfiction storytelling and examine how a documentary takes shape. Now, please welcome to the stage Variety's senior entertainment writer, Angelique Jackson.
Thank you so much, Dea, and thank you all so much for coming. I hope you guys are having a great Sundance so far. We are so happy to be here for one last time in Park City. As Dea said, my name is Angelique Jackson. I'm one of the senior entertainment writers at Variety, and it is my pleasure to be here for this Anatomy of a Doc conversation about the AI doc, How I Become an Apocaloptimist. And yes, I have been doing that 10 times fast, just like Dea said. But let's bring up the people that you actually want to hear from, starting with director Daniel Roher. And next we have director Charlie Tyrell, followed by producer Diane Becker, and last but certainly not least, producer Ted Tremper. All right. I mean, I actually kind of would like to start with the title, because obviously people know this is a documentary about AI, but I think the phrase Apocaloptimist is one that maybe we're even less familiar with. So, Daniel, maybe I'll start with you on that. How did you all end up coming to this as the title for this documentary?
We fought about it a lot. There were some people who felt that the word Apocaloptimist wasn't a real word, and it shouldn't be in the title. And I thought, well, we're making a new word, and that's cool, too. Here's the thing. Apocaloptimist. It's not just a word, it's a way of life. It's a being. It's how we should all maneuver in this uncertain future. In a world that's asking us to embrace visions of the apocalypse or lean into this unbridled optimism, we are saying no. There's a third path. Be apocalyptimists. And what that means for all of us is being thoughtful and careful and cautious and conscientious in the face of this wild and wonderful and terrifying technology that is barreling towards us like a meteor. And that's what an Apocaloptimist is, and it's our hope that everyone who sees this film will leave the theater thinking of themselves as an Apocaloptimist.
I just want to add that it was the hardest title to come up with, and that's why we're all laughing up here, because it was the last thing that we did, and you know, even ChatGPT gave us some terrible titles. We had over 200, so I'll leave it at that.
Whoa, yeah, test, mic check. Mic check. Can you keep my reverb up the whole time? It makes me have I think it's just my point. When we came up with the title, billions of years ago, when we came up with the title, let me really tell you what an Apocaloptimist is, Daniel.
Kind of fits the vibe of the film in a way, because it is giving us a little bit of that, like, doomsday, voice of God. Let's try it one more time. How?
Check, mic check, okay.
Right.
Can you do me a favor and just turn that on for me one more time, but don't tell me when? Okay. And I think the one thing I would add to the Apocaloptimist Untitled is that it is really important to differentiate between the vibes. The way I try to think about it is that your emotions are the gas for the car, but you still need to steer. And in terms of what being an Apocaloptimist means to me is that it's understanding that there actually is still a chance that we can make it through all this. If things go incredibly, I mean, not even incredibly well, we just change the default path that we're on. But the requirement to do that is for all of us, each individually, to not fall into despair, but rather to find courses of action within our regular lives so that we can change the default trajectory to one that is not truly an apocalypse. That's what I think. But.
Charlie, I mean, that is kind of the overarching theme of the doc as you watch through, is the idea that, you know, you're taking what could feel very depressing or feel incredibly optimistic and threading it through that needle. So tell me a little bit about the kind of like development of it as a story.
Yeah, well, I mean, I exist in a pretty general state of cynicism and depression and negativity and without hope. And part of that's the circumstance of the world, and part of that's just whatever I was born with. So I've already kind of done a lot of work personally to find optimism, find positivity, and find a way to practically tackle things, to, you know, see hope through it. And that was very much the case with this film because, you know, Daniel was having his firstborn son at the end of January in 2024. My son was born 6 days later. So that was kind of the thing that really started this whole project.
Today is Gideon's second birthday.
And happy birthday, Giddy. And my son is Sonny, by the way. So, you know, Daniel and I were just connected in the summer of 2023 trying to get something going together when this popped up. And it was just a big thing for us to kind of have with the assignment of making a film. So we were borrowing from that, and then it didn't take long before it brought itself into the story. So I know I'm not really answering your question, but it truly was the backbone of the film, which is, you know, we're no longer people that aren't destined to be parents. We are people that have this other thing to think about. So if we were both still probably single guys without children, maybe we would have had a really negative film that would just be called Apocalyptism, fuck everything. But we decided to call it this instead. And we get $1 every time someone says it now, so.
That was the working title, Apocalyptic, fuck everything. Okay, so here's the interesting thing about this movie.
There's only one. Pay attention.
This is for like the documentary people, so like the doc people here who like make documentaries. This movie did not want to be a movie. This did not want to be a documentary. There was nothing here innately that was like, oh, that's cinematic. That's cool. That's going to be great in a film. Diane and I did a film a few years ago called Navalny, and that movie wanted to be a documentary. Every single day it was like, yep, this is cinematic. This is pretty cool. This one was the opposite. It was the scene in Apollo 13 when the guys are stuck up there and those engineers come into the room and they drop a bunch of shit on the table. And they're like, we got to figure out how to get a square peg into a round hole. That was this creative exercise. Take something that wants to be a podcast or a book or an article and make it into a movie. And it took all of us to creatively engineer this thing into existence. And it was the hardest film, certainly I've ever made. And I think we might just have pulled the rabbit out of the hat. We're here, obviously, at Sundance. That's a good sign. But it was a really challenging exercise. And fundamentally, the way I talk about the movie is that it seeks to do a few things. What is AI? Why is it great? Why is it scary? How can we mitigate the scary and maximize the great? And as Ted spoke to very eloquently, how can we apply this to our lives and think about this in a way that is empowering and not fucking terrifying? And that simple arithmetic that I laid out was impossible. It's like make a film about like outer space or China or the Bible. It's like one of these gargantuan subjects to try and stuff into 90 minutes. It was a really challenging exercise, and that was the hardest part, I think, for all of us as we conceived of this movie, is that we really had to will it into existence.
I mean, plus the technology is changing every day. The timeline, we wanted to make this movie in a year. It took almost 3. Because once we started unpacking it, it was like, this never ends. The unpacking never ends. The knowledge never ends. The learning never ends. And, you know, it's felt like a Sisyphean task, right? Like in the sense of just, you know, you go down one road and then suddenly you're having to go down another, and it's like, how do you tell a story that respects the people that might not know enough about this technology and are here to learn, while also simultaneously being respectful to the tech community and all the work that they've done, because they're going to watch this film and have certain opinions. And those are two worlds that are incredibly difficult to align. And I mean, the entire team, it takes a lot of humans to talk about AI.
And to that idea, it isn't just, a talking head documentary. There are a ton of different elements to it. I actually wanted to kind of point to, obviously, Daniel's artwork is a huge part of this documentary, which is why he's doodling now. But you always have a pad at all times.
I just have to say, sign language interpreter over there is really like catnip for me. It's hard to draw hands, and so this is really exciting. You're doing a wonderful job. Yeah, again, like, there was this thing that happened with this movie where it was kind of like, how do we make this movie that doesn't want to be a movie? And very impulsively, around the same time that we were starting to talk about the film, Caroline, my wife, and I, we found out that we were going to have a baby. And it was like, oh, great, what kind of world is my son going to grow up into? That's emotional. People have kids. People can relate to babies. People love babies. Let's maybe anchor the film around that question. And it was an impulsive thing that I said on a Zoom or something, and everyone was like, "That's..."
Without telling his wife.
Without consulting Caroline, I was like, "Let's frame this around that mission of having a kid." And everyone thought it was a great idea, and it made a lot of sense. And then, like, cut to, I was like, "What have I done?" That was maybe an impulsive decision. I have ADHD. These things happen to me where I am very enthusiastic about something without thinking about the consequences. This is a pattern in my life, and it's good and a bad thing. And in this case, I ended up putting my wife in a documentary without asking her or telling her, and she just watched the rough cut. And we laugh about this now. It's good that we can laugh about this now. But I don't recommend anyone does that ever. It's not a good idea. But Caroline was a very good sport, and we just understood that the more personal a film like this is, when it's this big, gargantuan, esoteric subject, the more it can be framed in a specific experience, almost as a sort of pseudonym for a general experience, the more accessible the film became. And because I'm always drawing and doodling and painting, there's animations, and you can put my notebooks in the movie and stuff like that, and became sort of a creative jumping off point that Charlie, who's an animation genius, could really synthesize and explode.
Charlie.
Well, I mean, going back to catnip, like Daniel's notebooks, like, go to his house. There's a wall of these, and they're all filled with drawings. And I'm someone that used to draw but doesn't really do it anymore, so like the output alone is going to be looked at one day as a giant kind of piece in itself. And yeah, when we got into this film, we kind of jumped in feet first with, okay, let's just go interview 30 people in the Bay Area. And I love all of our subjects to death, but they are by nature technologists that are more kind of STEM-minded. And when you ask them, okay, you just told me this scary thing that the world's going on, how do you feel about that? They're like, what do you mean? Like, so a film that requires steady emotionality to get an audience through was a bit of a challenge, honestly, with our subjects. And again, love them all, they're all great, and they make the movie. But what is that kind of emotional piece that can be woven into this film? So not only with Daniel as the protagonist, with his wife due to give birth to their first son, these notebooks kind of gave us, like Daniel said, a great launch point into, we want to kind of be antithetical to the digital space of AI. We want to be handmade. We want to get real people in a studio and making these things one frame at a time, which is usually 4 to 7 seconds a day is what you get. And we got about 15 minutes. So it's this painful, laborious process, but it kind of creates this connection to an audience. You know that a person made that. You know that a person assembled that, put it together, and put it where it was. A lot of that started with Daniel has like I can tell you exactly how big it is. It's 8 feet by 20 feet and 6 inches, and it is 9 feet high on one end and 7.5 feet high on the other end. We copied his art studio in LA and rebuilt it in Toronto so that it could be kind of the main set piece for this world of animation. And it could be the backdrop. I would never, ever do it again.
I want to just interject very quickly. You made it sound like very fancy. It's a shack in my backyard. It's what it's like where you keep.
It's beautiful though.
Like rakes and stuff that I paint in and stuff.
Yeah, but it kind of gave us this, because we animated before the film was done. So the goal was, let's just kind of create these elements, create a toolbox that we can pull from as the story develops and kind of pull these things off the shelf and throw them into the story and try them out. And yeah, that was the thing to give kind of a mirror of Daniel's mind, like the purgatory that he was in making this film and the world that he was kind of stuck in. It gave us the lens to look at all that and to show his interpretation of everything as he went.
And then Ted, how many people did we interview?
So yeah, we on camera we interviewed over 40. I've forgotten how we have 3,326 pages of on camera transcripts, and then I interviewed and developed, I think, over 100 contacts inside and outside of the labs. And I would. The one thing I want to yes and for what Charlie said about our technologists and all of our interview subjects is I think that they are fascinating in who they are because they're human beings, and also their expertise was really ran the gamut from ethicists to activists to people who literally invented the technology to people who are building it now. And from my perspective, the secret sauce of the documentary is that we very unapologetically asked any question that any person who has never heard of this at all would ask. And in fact, my favorite question that we asked to every single person was, how do you think we'll fuck up making a documentary about AI? And the answers are so wonderful to see because, you know, I come from a comedy background and a hard news background. And so I'm always trying to use comedy as a tool to elucidate hypocrisy, whether I'm doing political satire or take an extremely complex subject and make it approachable for normal people. So the fact that my 76-year-old dad watched this movie and was able to explain back to me how the technology worked, and not only how it worked, but the intuitions about where it could go if it does continue to scale. He's never owned a laptop before. And so that was, to me, one of the moments that really meant the world to me was that he gets it. And also that a technologist seeing it would not be able to say, this is wrong, or that's kind of the mission we had, because we have to make it entertaining. We have to make it accurate. We can't make it so accurate that it loses its capacity to be entertaining. And we can't make it so entertaining that the people who really have very loud voices would dump on us for making it overly simplistic. And they're going to do that anyway. But I really do feel like because all of us have very different approaches, almost half of us, I think, have ADHD, the other half don't. And we were always pressure testing it from different sides, which I think is one of the really critical components of our team. I'm very nerdy and wonky, and also I'm what's known as a codependent. And so when I'm talking to all these different people who've built the technology, the only thing I'm thinking about when we're interviewing them or when we're pre-interviewing them, and sometimes I would pre-interview somebody for 20 hours. I'm not sure if it's because it's a process talk. I don't know if this comes from Studs Terkel, but when developing a contact, one rule that maybe Studs had was never be the person to end the conversation or the phone call. And the first conversation I had with a confidential source inside of one of the labs was 6.5 hours long. And it's because these people care very deeply about what they're building and the impact it's going to have on society. And when you earn the trust of that person, then that person, when you want to talk to somebody else, will tell you about the 3 other people inside of their lab who maybe have the same concerns that they do. And when you develop a contact like that, that's somebody that stays with you for years, and you can then continue building and building and building. I don't remember what the question was, but I'm hoping that's useful from a process side.
It's incredibly useful because also to that idea, you're building these connections with the kind of ultimate goal of speaking to the actual CEOs, the decision makers, the top people in AI. When you kind of set about that process, where did you start?
Have you seen the film A Beautiful Mind?
Angelique, I also have to say, the last movie Ted did was Borat, so we knew that he was going to be able to get anyone, and he was just a guy to let loose, and just in the background, it's like, Ted's got it, it's fine.
Well, no, I would say the difference between Borat and this movie was that our goals were slightly different. Insofar as we were really honestly just genuinely trying to understand the story of this technology and how it intersects with humanity, and Daniel's story and sort of Charlie's story as well as becoming parents, how that can resonate with somebody else. What is truthful? What is honest? Always coming toward from that standpoint. And to answer your question, it is a true fact that I think that you probably are all aware of, is that there currently is a race to build and deploy this technology. And there's a Charlie Munger quote, which lots of people in this space use, is show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. So when you're thinking about trying to get the CEOs or somebody for this kind of a film, you need to understand why they would want to participate in a movie like this. And it sort of became clear just based off of, I think it doesn't take a smart person to know that if you're in a race against 3 people or 5 people or whatever, and one of them decides to participate in a documentary, then you might be incentivized to participate in that too. And so I really believed that if we got one of them, we had a chance of getting more than one of them or all of them. So then the question becomes, how do you get one of them? And the answer to that question is you literally listen to everything they've ever said. You read everything they've ever written publicly. The reason I mentioned Beautiful Mind is that when she opens up his shack and it's just note cards and red yarn everywhere, like that's what my life was for 2.5 years.
2 Ron Howard references in one panel.
Nice, I like it. Okay, I'm going to work on a third one. When Mad Mardigan was storming, that's a Willow, that's a deep cut. But yeah, and so the good news is that the people that each of these people admire like become this foundation for how you build a picture of the way that they think and the things that they value. And if you can talk to somebody that one of the CEOs referenced in their blog post in 2018, and then you can have a conversation with them and you can understand the entirety of their work and everything that they've ever done and why they were important. And even if you don't put them on camera, you can have a 2.5-hour-long conversation with them and be genuinely curious and really show that you are actually trying to tell the story as opposed to sculpt some kind of narrative. Then you have the chance of basically laddering up to a point where when you do present the PR people for OpenAI or Anthropic or Google DeepMind with the list of people that you've interviewed, it happens to be 10 out of 10 of the people that they have referenced the most of who they value, respect, et cetera. So Borat is different because in that way, I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about that process because there's an NDA that I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to talk about. But in this case, the thing that is really different is the story of this film is really about coordination and how do we as a species figure out a way to co-evolve with strong technology. And those people are part of that conversation too, and they're a very loud part of that conversation. And if we can't coordinate with them, then we're going to continue down this default path where things don't end very well. So that's, again, I don't know if I'm answering any of these questions, but the altitude, it's very high up here.
You're doing great.
I just wanted to add and give a huge shout out to our editorial team because, you know, like I said, we were trying to make this movie in a year because we felt the urgency of it. And then once we started unpacking it, it just became clear. And Daisha Broadway, who's an amazing editor, came on board first. You know, when we were really searching for the film, which is like the hardest thing for an editor to do, especially in the documentary space where that's essentially when you're writing a script, right? So, you know, Daisha took it for, you know, almost a year. And then Davis Coombe came in, and Davis had cut a film called The Social Dilemma a few years ago, and Davis is an incredible mind and incredible talent. And, you know, I mean, we stress test him to, you know, the point of his brain almost breaking, like literally. And, you know, and so with the two of them, and then you have, you know, we have 3 other producers that aren't here today, Jonathan Wong and Dan Kwan and Shane Boris, and we had an incredible story producer, Joseph Beebe. So it was like making a film with the largest amount of people and brains you could possibly imagine, and you can imagine just the complexity of trying to unpack and organize all this over that time.
It was also really annoying. There's really annoying having all those people. And what we ultimately understood is that the way we make this movie, the people who are involved, the job titles that they have and their responsibilities was not normal. We had to sort of reinvent the wheel here, so to speak. So, you know, editors were directing, directors were producing were directing. It was like sort of that thing. And that sounds very annoying, and it was, but literally in order to make this movie, that's what we had to do. We had to reinvent a system in order to get this done, and that, in a way, mirrors what the world has to do to sort of coexist and co-evolve with this technology. So we were a little crash course.
It's funny you mentioned there's a machine learning, the famous experiment of machine learning that is much more interesting. I know that's a very boring way to start a sentence, but one of the first times that they ever proved that machines could basically iterate and figure out how to do things themselves was with a video game, and it was a little speedboat. And what they didn't tell it the rules, they just basically like, win this game. And the way that it found that it could win the game was by crashing into a buoy, because every time it hit the buoy, it would get 1,000 points. So it realized, oh, I don't need to win this race. I just need to crash into this as many times as possible. So it would go straight toward it and kill itself and explode over and over and over again, and it would win the game. And that is a metaphor for how he made the movie.
I mean, it literally is the word collaborative. Like, I mean, this is what the definition of collaborative is, you know. And I also just want to shout out Bunny Jurians, who's our co-producer, who literally had to manage, like, you know, how do you make a movie from a year to 2.5? Like, she and I had to stretch every last bit of resource and time that we had, and it took a village.
And shout out to associate producer EJ Likes, who's so many great things. Yeah.
Well, Diane, I want to dig into that just a little bit, that idea of the process going from, you know, 10 months to a year to being a 2.5-year process. As you're kind of evolving the visual of it too, and Charlie, would love to get some of your insight too. So we're talking about stop motion. You already mentioned, you know, the physical sets that you were building, also all of the archival material, Daniel's drawings. How did, as you kind of started to like get into that process, how did you start to develop, okay, here's a good place that we're going to start to use this. Here's how we're going to integrate this into the story.
We had a Google Doc that was the most insane, many Google Docs of many things. But eventually we had this essay that, you know, everybody was banging on, like literally everybody, you know, which is like, on one hand, I mean, that's the whole point of filmmaking, right? It's collaborative. But on the other hand, as Daniel's saying, like, it's really challenging, especially for, you know, for directors to, like, you have just so many voices, and like, how do you have a singular voice that has multiple voices? Right, and that was the sort of process that took time. You know, there was iterations of this early on where we thought we were going to have scripted elements, and then it became clear that we didn't necessarily need them, but that the animation stuff was working because, you know, one of the sort of benchmarks of it was like, how do we keep this film human? How do we keep talking about all this technology that will, like, it's so much information coming at you, your brain needs a break, right? And how do you tap into the humanity and the emotion and all of that? And that's where the animation and stop motion department is, you know, based in Canada. They're incredible, and they were really valuable partners with us. Right, Charlie?
Oh, yeah. And Phil's just a weird guy that good luck spending half an hour with him and not coming out different. Yeah, I mean, what Di's speaking to is we really needed lily pads throughout the film. It's a lot of information, and it's a lot of emotion and different kind of spectrums of emotion that you go through. So we knew we needed these places where you could touch down that would offer a bit of self-reflective for Daniel's character, and also just a way to kind of break up the movie, not necessarily to chapterize it, but to just let you know that you're shifting gears. And so we had, you know, these kind of components for the different acts of the film. And in terms of, you know, shouting people out, definitely enormous shout to Di and Bunny as well, because for animation, which is normally a calculated, measured, you know, you have all your previs before you go, and usually the film is done before you touch anything. We were completely going in like a jazzimation kind of approach. So it was just resources and support constantly is what, you know, we were able to have as we went to give room for that experimentation, give that room to find it as we went. And then the only other mop-up that we had to do was make sure that visual sequences were nimble enough so that maybe they could be reapplied to a different part of the film. If they don't work here, this is, you know, a big spinning cube that represents AI with a mischievous face on it that copies itself many times. We're like, okay, we have this person talking about how the AIs can copy themselves, but we also have another part of the film where maybe it will work. So we always kind of had a plan C, plan B, like, to get us through. And yeah, it was just, you know, throwing a lot of firepower and top-tier talent at, you know, the process.
Can I add one thing? This is a process talk. I think it's very important, from my perspective, to be ridiculous and to lean into, when things feel insane, it's nice to actually acknowledge that. And one of the ways that I tried to contribute to that was very early on, Daniel banned the use of the word outline and was like, I don't want to talk about outlines. So because we needed a word to talk about it, we changed that because it was October and it was spooky season. But instead of calling it an outline, we called it a story skeleton. So we had our story skeleton document, and instead of having the list of topics where all, this is a hyperobject subject, and so we needed to break it down into things, into little buckets. So I created a Google Doc that was not just a Google Doc, it was called Bucketown, USA. I was the mayor of Bucketown, USA. E.J. Likes was the sheriff of Bucketown, USA, because she had to make sure that everything was orderly. This is what happens when you're in a mental prison. And you need to find yourself a way to be able to go to work every day. And there's a word that I love, which is alacrity, which is a cheerful willingness to get things done. And that, I think, in terms of what one needs to do when a one-year project becomes a 2.5-year project, it's just teetering on the brink of insanity with your friends and keeping your commitment to get there.
And Daniel and I still never looked in Bucketown.
I've never fucking been to Bucketown in my life.
This is the other thing that's really important as from a process thing. Keep things away from the directors. Because you get to have, it's literally a theme park. We have so much AI-generated imagery that's just about Bucketown. There's lore. But yeah, and if you would like to join Bucketown, you can, but they're not allowed.
The thing that I love so much about this conversation, just in general, is, we're talking about this idea of all of this research as not being inherently cinematic, but because we have, a group of people who are filmmakers, and you guys have such knowledge and depth of just interest in film and cinema, you have just an entrance point into the ways of making it. I mean, listen, I'm somebody who my baseline knowledge for AI literally comes from the Disney Channel original movie Smart House. So, okay, great. We've got a few more Smart House fans here. We all say please and thank you to them, right? Yes. We don't want Katie Seagal coming for us. But that idea of, there are ways of getting people to know about this technology, and that is ultimately what you guys did with this film by bringing in all of these different elements. But there is one very important note at the very, very end of the film. So please stay through the credits, everyone. This idea, this work may not be used to train AI. So that is always a debate that we have, I think, in our filmmaking community, is how we engage with AI. So just the disclaimer of it all, and the need and importance of actually, obviously putting that on a project like this. Tell me a little bit about just kind of where you see that conversation, too. You want to take that one?
Sure. Currently, we're at a point in our industry and in each of our lives in which there truly are no real rules in regards to the ways that labs or people can use data that exists and can be taken to build things with it. They can take your vacation photos. They can take your voice, and they can create a clone of it in 11 seconds, and they can make you say anything. Currently, and this is my own personal opinion, I'll put it this way. The framework by which we can use these tools ethically in our careers and in our lives exists. The technology on how to do that has not emerged, and the incentives for the companies that are building it are to convince you and every person on Earth that it is impossible to be able to do that. For a variety of different reasons. We're racing with China, it's inscrutable, it's a black box, etc. We must not allow that to be an acceptable answer. This is where each of you come in, and if you agree with that, if you believe that it is valuable for a large language model to be able to help you give it a voice note and be able to turn that into a schedule for your day, that's a totally legitimate use of that technology. If that same large language model, multimodal model, is able to take a photograph of your child and create child sex abuse material out of it, then maybe you should contact some folks. If you disagree with that, maybe you should contact some folks and say, hey, I don't agree with this. I'm not using your project anymore because it can do that. And the very scary part is that underneath the hood of all of these things, those capabilities are baked into it. And therefore, the actual guardrails that we need to build, and this is where the ethical part of it comes in, is regardless of who you are, the voice that you have to stand up and say, hey, I don't agree with this, that's where we build consensus. Because the one blessing of the way that humanity is facing this technology is that for an astonishingly long period of time, it is yet to become a bipartisan issue in the United States. And that is the very key thing that we need to continue. And granted, there have been executive orders to try to do all kinds of different things. By the time even that this thing is distributed, there will probably be more or different ones. That doesn't mean that that can't change. And it doesn't mean that we cannot continue saying things like, I mean, when you're asked to sign a release, for example, for like a panel talk, you can ask, is there a clause in there that forbids my likeness to be used for generative models? And if it's not in there, you can say, okay, I'll sign it when there is one in there. That's a very simple thing that you can do. And so when it comes to a film, releasing a film, putting that in the film doesn't mean that it's not going to get stolen anyway. But at the very least, you have made a declaration that you do not have my consent to do this. And that when you find that things that you care about have been stolen, or things that other people, like when the likeness of other people that you care about have been stolen, or your work, et cetera, you do need to use your voice to push back. And you do need to celebrate the people who are trying to do it well, even if they're failing. Yeah, I could say a lot more because it's a very deep issue, but is that okay, Di?
I think that was great.
Okay. And I do want to shout out, actually, I know that we're in the Adobe house, and I'm not doing this under duress. But Adobe does actually represent a company that is trying very hard to do it well. Like, they are actually trying to build models from licensed material. And even just that gesture is deeply meaningful, because the default perspective of a lot of the large labs is, oh, this is fair use. This was out there, and so it's ours now, and we can use it. And that is being determined by the courts and in case law right now. But the voluntary commitment from Adobe or from other companies that actually have relationships with artists and want to build things to say, you know what, it would certainly be a lot easier for us to steal the totality of human wisdom, knowledge, and art, but we're going to at least try to make something that honors our commitment to artists. And I earlier asked to have my paid subscription to Adobe comped for a month or a year, but now I can't actually accept that because I don't want that statement to be misconstrued as payola. So I want to say I'm not a paid spokesman for Adobe, but one needs to celebrate and also create pressure on them to do that, and celebrate them when they do.
In every corner of our life, not just in the creative
Absolutely.
community, right? If you're a mom, you got a kid, or if you don't have a kid, and you just care about other people's kids, or you care about education, or you care about medicine. Like, I think the thing about the film that we hope, and it's what documentaries do, is it makes you lean in, and it makes you sit up, and it makes you kind of question things and kind of go, all right, well, what do I need to do? What's my own responsibility in this?
Can I make one last thing? So I went to my doctor's office, or I tried to call to make an appointment, and when I called, it was an AI. It was clearly an AI voice, and you're going to truly. That's one of the emerging landscapes where jobs will be obliterated. Is going to be customer service people. It is critically important that when you actually talk to a human being, just say, number one, the thing that's deeply unethical about that is that it didn't declare itself to be an AI. And if there are people who are older or unfamiliar with the technology and they think they're talking to a person about medical things and it's going into a model that's later going to be changed, that's a huge liability. So when I went and actually saw the doctor, I said, hey, it's deeply unethical for you to be using an AI voice in the context of medicine without declaring it. And in fact, it actually creates a huge legal liability for you. So you need to either immediately change it so it declares that it's an AI model and that the conversation could be used for training further work of this AI model, or stop using it. And guess what? The next time I called to set an appointment, that fucking robot was gone.
Progress.
So I will say last thing, just general consensus. After making this doc, are all of you now Apocaloptimists?
I am.
Charlie?
I'm always a bit of a lemonade maker, though.
You're a producer.
That's all we do.
Yeah, by nature, through the making of this film and of just who I am, yeah, absolutely.
Daniel, yes?
Yes.
Well, hopefully you all, once you see this doc, will be Apocaloptimists as well. And also just a reminder, you can also tell all your friends to see it come March 27th. So thank you all for joining us for this first conversation.
Thanks,
Thank you all
everybody.
so much,
Thanks
guys.
for coming.